This is MSNBC Live with Alex Witt, June 10th, 2018.
Accused Mr. Trudeau of making false statements, reversed course on endorsing the G7 statement, and then threatened new tariffs on imported cars. Joining me now, Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu of California. He sits on the Foreign Affairs and Judiciary Committees. Congressman, I want you to react to what Peter Navarro said and Larry Kudlow said right there. First of all, to Peter Navarro, saying that Justin Trudeau has a special place in hell reserved for him for having attempted to diplomatically hoodwink this President Donald J. Trump. I have rarely heard such harsh back and forth between senior advisors, representatives of administrations to another country's leader.
Thank you, Alex, for that question. It does not help the American worker when the president throws a temper tantrum at one of our closest allies. And it's particularly odd to go after Canada for three reasons. Number one, the U.S. has an $8.4 billion trade surplus with Canada. Number two, Canada has lower average tariffs than the United States. And number three, American steel companies and steel workers oppose these tariffs on Canadian steel. So the very industry that the Trump administration is trying to help opposes these tariffs. None of this makes any sense.
That said, Congressman, is there any part of this that is justifiable? The president himself keeps reiterating the farmers, specifically dairy farmers. Is that at least where there is legitimate concern for trade imbalance between the two countries?
That's actually not the reason that the United States, according to the Trump administration, imposed these steel tariffs on Canada. And if I were a steel worker, I'd be quite offended that Donald Trump is trying to use the steel industry and steel workers to somehow affect dairy. That's not how this should be done. And at the end of the day, a trade war doesn't help anyone. It's going to ultimately hurt middle-class families across America.
Showmanship in all of this. Is this largely about that? Or do you think this really has an impact on the United States' standing as a world leader?
It's both. This trade war has already affected Americans. Mexico has now increased tariffs on pork, on apples, on potatoes, on bourbon whiskey. There has been recent articles in Wisconsin how companies there are suffering because of these tariffs. And then if you just look at this purely in terms of showmanship, Trump now enters North Korea summit in a weakened position because the North Koreans know with Trump's disastrous performance of the G7, he's now desperate for any kind of diplomatic victory that he can claim, regardless of what that might be.
To your point, Larry Kudlow has a bit of a different spin on the relationship between what happened with the G7 and this summit upcoming on Tuesday. Let's listen to what he had to say about it.
POTUS is not going to let a Canadian prime minister push him, POTUS, around President Trump. On the eve of this, he is not going to permit any show of weakness on the trip to negotiate with North Korea, nor should he.
So this was about North Korea?
Of course it was, in large part.
So because Trudeau said that.
So does this help or hurt the president's position when it comes to dealing with North Korea? My question is specifically when you see in the negotiations between the president and Justin Trudeau, there are smiles, there are handshakes, there are verbal agreements, and that visage to the world of, there was some back and forth, and you knew they weren't necessarily on the entirely same page, but then you see what happens afterwards. So the question is, does Kim Jong-un look at this and say, I wonder how much Donald Trump's word is worth. I wonder how much the ink is worth on the paper when Donald Trump signs something?
Alex, that's a great point. I think what the North Koreans can see from this is that Donald Trump is an unreliable partner. America can no longer be relied upon. And what Justin Trudeau said has not been any different than what many other countries have said, from Mexico to European Union. They've consistently said if the United States imposes tariffs, they're going to retaliate. And now North Korea sees that we're not going to be strong with our allies. They're going to try to drive a wedge between the United States and our allies. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to issues like North Korea and Iran, we need our allies. America cannot do this alone.
Is there anything that you, a member of Congress, and the entire body can do to somewhat change this trajectory?
I'm on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm going to be calling for hearings on, first of all, why Russia should be back in the G7 according to the president, hearings on North Korea. Unfortunately, the Republican-controlled Congress is unwilling to do anything in terms of proper oversight of the executive branch. And if voters want to change that, they have opportunity this November to change the makeup of Congress.
Congressman, are there any elements of the president's trade and tariff demands that you do agree with?
So look, trade is complicated. There are good deals and bad deals. I oppose the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which Donald Trump also opposed, because that was a bad deal. But that's very different than starting a trade war, which is what Trump is doing. And when he started a trade war with Mexico, Canada, China, the European Union, ultimately that's going to hurt middle-class families across America. Democrats have a much better deal, and I hope that the voters see that in November.
What are your expectations for the summit on Tuesday?
I served under Pacific Air Forces when I was on active duty. I know the United States has exactly 0 good military options against North Korea. So I want this summit to succeed. I want the president to do well at the summit. Unfortunately, he goes in with a weakened position. He's admitted he hasn't prepared very much for this summit. North Korea has been wanting this summit for years. Previous presidents did not agree to it. Trump has. I really hope that this summit goes well, and we'll see what happens.
Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu of Los Angeles, thank you so much for your time as always, sir.
Thank you.
So what should President Trump push for in his meeting with Kim Jong-un? My next guest gives his take in just a few